The church bells rang across the city that bright morning, their deep, melodic chimes echoing against marble-paved streets and dancing across the tall glass windows of the downtown district. The air carried a rare electricity, the kind that only came with great anticipation, because this was no ordinary wedding. It was the wedding of the year, the one people had whispered about for months in hushed conversations over dinners and business meetings. Reporters and photographers clustered like hawks outside the cathedral, their cameras clicking with urgency each time a sleek luxury car purred to a stop in front of the grand stone steps. Guests emerged in gowns that shimmered like water under the sun and in suits tailored to perfection, their faces lit with the pride of being part of such a spectacle. The cathedral itself, a towering relic of faith and grandeur, had been transformed into something almost otherworldly, glowing under the brilliance of imported flowers, crystal chandeliers, and aisles draped with silk ribbons. Every eye inside waited for that one sacred moment when Millionaire, the young millionaire groom, would stand beside his breathtaking bride-to-be and vow his forever. But beneath all the dazzling layers of wealth, beneath the glitter and applause, lay a truth that no one, neither the guests, nor the bride, nor even the groom, expected. It would come not from a scandalous reporter or a bitter ex-lover, but from a woman so invisible to society that most of the people in the cathedral had walked past her countless times without sparing her a glance. Her name was Marina Costa. She was not a guest, nor family, nor part of the glamorous world surrounding this grand event. She was a cleaner, a woman in her late 50s whose life had been defined by work others refused to do. Marina's story was written in the lines of her face, carved deep by years of exhaustion, sacrifice, and quiet endurance. Her hands, marked with thick calluses, told of endless scrubbing, polishing, and carrying heavy buckets that bent her back but never her will. She was the kind of woman who could glide through a banquet hall unnoticed, always with her head lowered, moving swiftly with her mop and rag as if trying not to disturb the glittering world of the wealthy. For decades, Marina had cleaned homes that weren't hers, offices that buzzed with lives above her station, and ballrooms where others celebrated milestones she was never invited to share. That morning, she had been summoned by the wedding planners with the same urgency as the florists and decorators, her task simple but essential: make the cathedral shine. Every pew was to be spotless, every marble tile gleaming like a mirror, so that not even the most judgmental guest could find fault with the venue. She worked quietly in the background while flower arrangements worth thousands were delicately positioned, while waiters rehearsed the serving of champagne, while crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the sacred space. Marina bent down, scrubbing with careful precision, her presence invisible, her labor taken for granted. Yet in her silence, she carried a weight that would soon rupture the flawless facade of the wedding. For Marina was not simply a cleaner that day. She held within her a secret that tied her life to the very heart of the ceremony, to Adrian himself, the man everyone had come to see. Millionaire, young, powerful, and admired, was a figure who seemed untouchable. His fortune, built on international investments, gave him the kind of influence most men twice his age had not yet achieved. His polished smile graced magazines, and his reputation for charm and generosity drew respect even from his rivals. But behind the glossy image was a man haunted by memory. He had been raised by a single mother, a woman who had worked herself to the bone so he could have a chance at something greater. Though Adrian rarely spoke of it publicly, that past remained etched in him, reminding him that loyalty and sacrifice meant more than wealth or prestige. And yet, as fate often weaves its cruel and beautiful patterns, Adrian had chosen Celeste Grant to be his bride. Celeste was dazzling, gorgeous in the way society adored, elegant in every movement, with family connections that ensured she belonged to the most powerful circles of influence. To the world, she seemed like the perfect woman for him, poised, sophisticated, and admired like royalty. But appearances are deceiving, and behind closed doors, Celeste was not the angel she pretended to be. Beneath the charm and beauty, she harbored a cruel indifference, a hunger for status, and a heart colder than the diamonds that glittered at her throat. And so, on that morning of perfection, as Adrian prepared to bind his future to a woman admired by all, Marina Costa, humble, overlooked, and trembling in her worn shoes, stepped forward at the altar. With a voice that cracked yet carried through the silence of the cathedral, she revealed the truth she had hidden for years. And in a single breath, she shattered the illusion of that perfect wedding, changing everything forever. Celeste Grant was a vision of beauty in the eyes of society, but beneath the flawless surface, her heart was sharp with arrogance. She wore her pride like a crown, dismissing anyone she deemed beneath her with cutting remarks that could leave scars deeper than knives. Her words were often laced with cruelty, particularly toward those who served quietly in the background, as though their very existence was an insult to her superiority. Among her frequent targets was Marina Costa, the poor cleaner who worked with bowed head and steady hands, sweeping through grand halls where she was never acknowledged. Celeste took pleasure in belittling her, often mocking Marina's simple clothing, her faint accent, and even her age. The insults, delivered in front of other staff and sometimes even laughing guests, stung deeply. But Marina swallowed her pain in silence. Trouble was not a luxury she could afford. For every insult, she tightened her grip on her dignity, holding it close like a fragile flame. Yet, in her heart, the ache grew heavier each time she was reminded of how invisible she was in a world built for the privileged. On the morning of the wedding, Marina's duties took her near the bridal suite, a place she rarely lingered for fear of Celeste's disdain. With her mop in hand, she moved quietly, polishing the floors, ensuring not a speck of dust marred the perfection the guests expected. It was then, as she paused to adjust her supplies, that she overheard something that rooted her to the spot. Celeste's voice, low but fierce, drifted through the half-open door. She was on the phone, her tone sharp as steel, every word filled with venom. Marina froze, her heart hammering, as she listened. "Don't worry," Celeste hissed into the receiver. "Once I'm married, Adrian's money is as good as ours. He's too blinded by love to see the truth. Just make sure the accounts are ready when I call. I won't waste my life on a man who actually believes in fairy tales." The words slashed through the air, cruel and calculating, leaving Marina trembling where she stood. She clutched the mop handle tightly as though it could anchor her spinning thoughts. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath caught between disbelief and horror. She had always sensed something false behind Celeste's polished smile, but to hear it confirmed so coldly was different. It was devastating. Marina knew, in that moment, that the bride's love was nothing but an illusion, a mask worn for the sake of wealth and power. Adrian, kind and genuine, was about to walk straight into a life of deception. Fear surged through Marina as her conscience wrestled with her instinct for survival. Who was she to speak up? She was nobody, just a cleaner, invisible in the gilded world these people lived in. If she spoke the truth, who would believe her over Celeste Grant, the picture of refinement and perfection? She could already imagine the sneers, the laughter, the humiliation of being thrown out, perhaps even barred from finding work in the only way she knew how. Her family depended on her, her very survival depended on these jobs. And yet, if she stayed silent, she would be complicit in allowing Adrian to marry a woman who cared nothing for him. Her heart pulled her back to one memory, an afternoon months earlier, when Adrian had entered the cathedral quietly while she scrubbed the floors. Unlike the countless others who walked past her as though she were a shadow, Adrian had stopped. He had smiled at her, not the shallow kind of smile reserved for courtesy, but a genuine one that carried warmth. He had offered her a bottle of water, noticing her exhaustion, and even asked her name as though it mattered to him. That moment, small and fleeting, had stayed with Marina like a spark in the cold. In his eyes, she had not been invisible. For the first time in years, she had felt seen, respected, even dignified. Now, standing on the cusp of his greatest day, she felt the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. The grand organ began to play, its booming notes reverberating through the cathedral's stone walls, filling the air with solemnity and joy. Guests rose to their feet, their gowns shimmering, their jewels glinting under the chandeliers. Heads turned as Celeste appeared at the doors, gliding down the aisle like a vision of perfection, her gown breathtaking, her veil flowing like a river of silk. The crowd whispered in awe, enchanted by the image she projected. But Marina's stomach churned with dread, for she knew what lay hidden beneath that flawless exterior. Each step Celeste took brought Marina closer to a decision that could destroy her own life, or save Adrian's. Adrian stood at the altar, his face glowing with nervous joy, his hands clasped together as though holding on to the moment with fragile hope. The grand cathedral shimmered with light from the chandeliers, golden beams cascading over the polished marble, reflecting off the stained glass windows that cast fragments of color across the pews. His heart pounded, but it was the exhilaration of a man who believed, truly believed, that he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. Guests watched with admiration, their whispers hushed, their eyes locked on the young billionaire who seemed untouchable in his happiness. To them, it was a fairy tale unfolding, a union of love, beauty, and power. At the back of the cathedral stood Marina, her plain uniform a stark contrast to the glittering silks and jewels that surrounded her. She held an envelope in her trembling hands, a set of documents the wedding planner had asked her to deliver at the proper moment, an errand that gave her reason to stand there, though her true burden was heavier. In her other hand, though invisible to everyone else, she clutched something far greater than paper. She held courage, fragile yet burning, pushing her forward even as fear threatened to smother her voice. Every second felt like eternity as she wrestled with the choice, silence, or truth. Then came the question, the age-old words that carried more weight than any vow: if anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The cathedral fell into profound silence. Even the air seemed to still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And before Marina could stop herself, before fear could chain her again, her voice rose into that silence. I cannot stay silent. The words trembled, but they carried across the marble halls with the clarity of a bell. Gasps erupted from the pews, a ripple of shock sweeping through the crowd. Heads turned sharply. Adrian's smile faltered, his brow furrowing in confusion as his eyes fell on Marina, the cleaner, the invisible woman in her modest uniform, standing now at the altar, with tears shimmering in her eyes. Celeste's face blanched, drained of its practiced glow, before twisting into fury, her lips tightening into a sharp, venomous line. Marina's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break her ribs, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her voice shook, yet each word carried conviction. She spoke of what she had overheard, repeating Celeste's cruel, calculating confession, her whispers of greed and betrayal. Every sentence cut through the air like thunder, shattering the illusion of perfection. She begged Adrian not to dismiss her words, not for her sake, she was nothing, a nobody in this cathedral, but for his. She implored him to open his eyes, to see beyond the veil of beauty and status, to recognize the emptiness of the woman he was about to bind his life to. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence was thick, broken only by the gasps of horrified guests and the faint echo of Marina's words lingering in the vaulted ceiling. Then came the eruption. Celeste's voice, sharp and venomous, cracked through the tension as she burst into rage. She pointed at Marina, calling her a liar, a bitter old woman desperate for attention, a jealous servant seeking to ruin a day that had nothing to do with her. Her words spilled like acid, but the fury in her voice carried a truth she could not hide: panic. The guests shifted uneasily, their whispers filling the air like a storm. Some recoiled in disbelief, unable to accept that their golden bride could be so cruel. Others looked between Adrian and Celeste, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Cameras flashed furiously, every expression captured, every whispered word immortalized. Adrian stood still as stone, his eyes locked not on Marina, but on Celeste. He searched her face, desperate for truth, but what he saw unraveled him. Memories crashed into his mind, the way she dismissed waiters with disdain, the sharpness in her tone whenever he spoke of charity, the hollowness in her compliments. The subtle ways she recoiled from anything that did not benefit her. All the signs had been there, silent warnings he had ignored because love, or what he thought was love, had blinded him. Finally, he turned to her, his voice soft but steady. "Celeste, is it true?" Her eyes widened. She stammered, denying, grasping for words, but the venom in her anger betrayed her. The more she spoke, the more her mask crumbled, and the room could see the truth in the cracks. In that instant, something inside Adrian shifted, a clarity breaking through the fog of infatuation. His jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and when he turned to the priest, his voice was resolute. "This wedding," he said, his tone ringing clear as the cathedral bells, "is cancelled." The words detonated through the room. Gasps and cries echoed from every corner as Celeste's face twisted into rage and humiliation. She let out a piercing scream, her gown swirling around her as she stormed down the aisle, her heels striking the marble like hammers. The cameras followed her every step, capturing the collapse of her perfect image, while the guests watched, stunned and breathless. At the altar, Adrian remained, his face pale but steady, his eyes finding Marina's. In them was no anger, only the dawning weight of gratitude, and a sorrow for what might have been. Marina, trembling, lowered her head, her tears finally spilling, knowing she had risked everything, and yet perhaps, in that moment, saved a man from ruin. Adrian did not chase after Celeste as she stormed down the aisle, her gown trailing behind her like a torn illusion unraveling in real time. The echoes of her rage still bounced off the marble walls, but he stood still, his face calm, as though a great weight had lifted from his chest. Slowly, deliberately, he turned away from the spectacle of her retreat and walked toward Marina. The entire cathedral seemed to hold its breath, all eyes fixed on the unexpected union of two people from worlds apart. The billionaire groom in his tailored suit and the weary cleaner in her plain uniform, her shoes scuffed from a lifetime of labor. When he reached her, his expression softened. Gratitude filled his eyes, and his voice was low, meant only for her as he took her trembling hands gently into his own. "You gave me the truth," he whispered, and in that moment, Marina could no longer contain herself. The tears she had fought so desperately to suppress streamed freely down her cheeks. Her voice, so often ignored and dismissed, had finally mattered. For the first time in decades, she was seen not as invisible labor, but as a woman whose words carried weight. What followed was unlike anything anyone had expected. The scandal erupted like wildfire, spreading through the city within hours. Headlines screamed of the dramatic altar confession, of the glamorous bride exposed for her deception, and of the humble cleaner who had dared to speak the truth. But instead of ridicule or pity falling upon Adrian, the world admired him, for his strength to walk away from a loveless marriage and for the clarity to listen to a voice no one else would have considered. And Marina, once invisible, found herself at the center of something extraordinary. News outlets told her story, painting her not as a meddler but as a heroine who had saved a man from being trapped in a gilded cage. Strangers from every corner of the city reached out with letters and messages, praising her honesty. Some even offered her better jobs, eager to give dignity to the woman who had stood so bravely against power and privilege. But Adrian went further than anyone imagined. His gratitude for Marina could not be expressed in words alone, so he took action that would ripple far beyond the cathedral's walls. Standing before her, he declared she would never again have to toil unseen, scrubbing the lives of others in silence. Instead, he offered her a role at his side, not as a cleaner, but as a leader. He established a charitable foundation in her honor, the Costa Foundation, dedicated to uplifting underprivileged women, helping them find dignity not only in work but also in education and opportunity. The very cathedral that had been prepared for a wedding of wealth and appearances had, instead, borne witness to the birth of something greater, a bond between truth and kindness, forged in the courage of one woman who refused to let silence destroy a man's future. Marina, who had once walked the world with lowered eyes, became a symbol of integrity and resilience. People spoke her name with respect, not as the cleaner in the shadows, but as the woman who had changed the course of a billionaire's life. Adrian, once blinded by beauty and status, had found clarity in the simplest yet most powerful act, listening to the truth, no matter where it came from. And though their paths remained different, their lives forever intertwined, both carried with them a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. On that bright morning, under the echo of cathedral bells, the story that began as a spectacle of wealth transformed into a lesson for an entire city. A poor cleaner's trembling voice had saved a millionaire's future, and in doing so, reminded the world that courage and honesty were worth more than gold.